Imagine a world where galaxies collide, where an alien woman is left broken and forgotten on a dying planet, till a human, against every law of nature and reason, dares to save her. What begins as a rescue becomes something far more dangerous, an impossible love that could change the destiny of two worlds. Space is a place of endless darkness, filled with stars that shine like diamonds on black velvet. Every light we see in the sky comes from a sun, and around those suns are worlds full of secrets. For thousands of years, humans on Earth have wondered, are we alone? Some scientists believe we cannot be the only intelligent life in such a huge universe. And they are right. Far beyond our planet, in a galaxy that humans had never reached, there lived beings who looked both strange and beautiful creatures, with glowing eyes, silver skin, and voices that could echo in the air like music. One of these beings was a woman, unlike any other. She came from a proud race known for their wisdom and strength. But her fate turned cruel. Betrayed by her own people, she was abandoned on a planet where the air burned her lungs. The storms cut her skin, and the silence made her heart ache. She was left to die, far from her home, far from anyone who might have cared. Each day she fought against the pain, her body weakening, her spirit almost gone. On Earth, at the same time, a man named Daniel lived a quiet life. He was not a hero, not a soldier, and not a scientist. He was just an ordinary human with an extraordinary curiosity. Ever since he was a child, he had loved looking up at the night sky, dreaming of what was out there. People laughed at him, saying he wasted his time on fantasies. But Daniel believed in possibilities, believed that love, kindness, and courage were stronger than fear. One night, while studying the stars with his small telescope, Daniel saw something strange. A flash of light, too bright and too fast to be a normal shooting star, cut across the sky. Moments later, his computer picked up a signal he had never seen before, faint, broken message, not from Earth. His heart raced. Could it be? Without knowing it, Daniel had just discovered the alien woman's desperate cry for help. While she struggled to breathe in the toxic air of her prison planet, her body unknowingly sent out energy waves, signals of her fading life. And Daniel, the one man who still believed, was the only person who could hear her. This was the beginning of a story that would defy all reason. A story of how two lives, separated by galaxies, would find each other through pain, hope, and something even the stars could not explain. Daniel sat frozen in front of his computer, his eyes locked on the strange signal dancing across the screen. At first he thought it was some kind of error, maybe static from a satellite or interference from a passing plane, but the pattern kept repeating. It wasn't random. It had rhythm, like a heartbeat, like someone was trying to speak through the silence of space. He leaned closer, adjusting the frequency again and again until the noise became clearer. The sound was faint, broken, almost like a voice whispering through layers of static. It wasn't English. It wasn't any language Daniel had ever heard before. Yet deep inside, he felt something familiar. There was emotion in the signal, sadness, pain, and a kind of desperate plea for help. Is someone out there? Daniel whispered, even though he knew no one could hear him. His heart pounded, felt both terrified and excited. If this really was a message from beyond Earth, then he had stumbled upon the greatest discovery in human history. But more than that, he felt a strange connection, as if whoever was sending this signal was not just calling into space, they were calling to him. Daniel couldn't sleep that night. He stayed awake, writing down every detail, recording every sound. He searched through books, old archives, and even forums where people discussed UFOs and space signals. Most of it was nonsense, but one thing was clear. This was not something ordinary. It was alive. The next evening, the signal grew stronger. Daniel adjusted his telescope, scanning the sky, when suddenly he saw a small streak of light near the edge of the atmosphere. It looked like a falling star, but it moved differently, slower, deliberate, almost controlled. His breath caught in his throat. Could it be connected? Could this be where the signal was coming from? For a moment, Daniel thought about ignoring it. He was just one man, with no training, no powerful machines, no government support. What could he possibly do? But then he remembered the sound in that signal, the faint, broken cry that carried pain and loneliness. He couldn't turn away. Against all logic, Daniel made a choice that would change his life forever. He packed a small bag with water, food, and a few tools, then loaded his old Jeep. He didn't know exactly where he was going, but he followed the coordinates the signal hinted at. It led him away from the city, past quiet highways, into the wilderness, where the stars above shone brighter and clearer than anywhere else. Hours passed. The road grew rougher, the air colder. Daniel's heart raced as his laptop beeped louder and louder, the signal growing stronger. Finally, deep in the desert, he saw something, ahead in unnatural glow, like silver fire against the sand. He stopped the Jeep, stepping out into the cold night. And there, lying broken on the ground like a fallen angel, was a figure he could hardly believe. Her skin shimmered faintly in the moonlight, her body weak, her breath shallow. She was not human. She was the source of the signal. And Daniel, an ordinary man, was the only one who had found her. Daniel froze. His mind screamed that what he was seeing was impossible, yet his eyes told him it was real. Lying in the sand before him was a woman, but not like any woman of Earth. Her skin shimmered like liquid silver, catching every flicker of moonlight. Her long hair flowed around her face, strands glowing faintly as though woven with light. Her eyes, half open, glowed with a soft blue hue that looked more like the ocean than anything human. She was breathtaking, but not in the way of beauty. Alone she was otherworldly, fragile and broken. Her body trembled with shallow breaths. Strange burns marked her arms, and her lips parted as if she was struggling to whisper a word. Daniel's first instinct was fear. His hands shook, his heart raced. This was no dream, no fantasy from a childhood storybook. This was real. He took a cautious step forward, his boots crunching in the sand. The sound made her flinch, her glowing eyes flickering with a mix of fear and pain. Daniel stopped immediately, raising his hands slowly. "It's okay," he said softly, his voice trembling. "I won't hurt you." She didn't understand the words. He could tell, but something in his tone seemed to calm her. Her glowing eyes studied him for a moment, then closed again, as if even staying awake was too heavy a burden. Daniel's mind raced with questions. Who is she? Where does she come from? Why is she here? But the most urgent thought pushed all others aside. She's dying. He knelt beside her, careful not to touch her too quickly. Her skin shimmered, but it was cold, too cold. He pulled off his jacket and gently laid it across her shoulders. "Stay with me," he whispered. "I'll help you." For a moment her lips moved. Sound broken and faint slipped out. It wasn't English, but Daniel felt it in his chest rather than his ears. It was a plea, a simple word filled with desperation. Help. The connection struck him like lightning. This wasn't just some strange creature from the stars. This was a person, someone alone, afraid and abandoned. She wasn't a monster, and she wasn't dangerous. She was vulnerable. Daniel carefully slid his arms beneath her, surprised at how light she felt, as if gravity clung less to her body than it did to his. He carried her back to the Jeep, laying her gently in the back seat, covering her with blankets. His mind screamed that he should call someone, authorities, scientists, anyone. But deep down, he knew what would happen if the world found her. She wouldn't be saved. She would be studied, trapped, maybe even destroyed. No, he couldn't let that happen. As he started the engine, he glanced back at her. Her eyes flickered open just for a moment, and in them he saw something impossible to explain: trust. She didn't know his language. She didn't know his world. But somehow she believed in him. And in that single look, Daniel realized his life had changed forever. The drive back felt endless. The desert stretched on, silent except for the steady hum of the Jeep's engine. Every few minutes Daniel glanced into the back seat where the alien woman lay. Her breathing was shallow, but at least steady. He couldn't stop staring. She looked so human, yet so impossibly different. The silver shimmer of her skin shifted like moonlight on water, and her hair glowed faintly even in the dark. By the time he reached his small house on the edge of town, the first hints of dawn painted the horizon. Exhausted but determined, Daniel carefully carried her inside. His home was simple: one floor, a living room that doubled as a study, and a spare room that hadn't been used in years. He laid her down on his old couch, pulling the blanket tighter around her fragile frame. For a moment, he just stood there, staring at her. Questions swirled in his head. What if someone saw me bring her here? What if the government tracked the signal too? What if I get arrested for hiding an alien? The fear was real, but so was the pull inside him, the feeling that she needed him and only him. He hurried to the kitchen, grabbing a bowl of water and a clean towel. Kneeling beside her, he dabbed at the burns on her skin, careful and gentle. The burns didn't look like anything he had ever seen. The edges glowed faintly, as if the wound itself was alive. But when the cool water touched them, her face softened, and for a moment, she almost looked at peace. Daniel smiled faintly. "That's better, isn't it?" he whispered. Hours passed. The sun rose higher, filling the room with golden light. Daniel sat by her side, his notebook open as he scribbled everything he noticed: her breathing pattern, the strange pulse of light beneath her skin, the symbols that appeared faintly on her wrist when she stirred. He wasn't a scientist, but his curiosity drove him to record every detail. Then, just as he was about to doze off, her eyes opened. This time, she was more awake. The glowing blue orbs locked onto his, filled with confusion and pain. She tried to speak, her voice soft and musical, but the words made no sense to him. Daniel raised his hands gently, shaking his head. "I don't understand," he admitted. "But I want to." He grabbed a notebook and drew a simple picture of himself, pointing to it. "Daniel," he said slowly. Then he pointed at her, waiting. She blinked, her lips parting. A word came, broken, but clear. "Alira." Daniel's heart skipped. It wasn't just noise. She had given him her name. He repeated it softly. "Alira." She closed her eyes, as if comforted by hearing it from him. From that moment, something changed. They were no longer strangers. They had names, and names were the beginning of connection. Daniel knew life would never be the same. He had taken in an alien woman left to die, and now she was here, in his home, whispering her name like a fragile promise. And somehow, in the quiet of that morning, he felt that promise binding his fate to hers. For the first time in his life, Daniel felt like he was living inside a secret bigger than himself. Every second he spent in the same room as Alira was a reminder of how dangerous and how precious this secret was. Outside his walls, the world carried on as usual. Cars passed down the road. Neighbors walked their dogs. The mailman delivered letters. But inside his small house, an alien woman lay recovering, and Daniel was the only one who knew she existed. He couldn't tell anyone, not his friends, not his family, not even the local authorities. The government would not see Alira as a person. To them, she would be an experiment, something to cut open and study under a microscope. The thought made Daniel sick. He remembered the way she had looked at him with those glowing blue eyes, full of fear but also trust. He couldn't betray that trust, so he kept her hidden. He closed the curtains, locked the doors, and turned off every device that might send signals outside his house. At work, he made excuses to his boss, claiming he was sick or busy with personal matters. His coworkers joked that Daniel was probably just being his strange space-obsessed self again. They had no idea how close they were to the truth. At home, Daniel focused on Alira. She was weak, but slowly getting stronger. Each day she tried to sit up for longer. Sometimes she whispered words in her language, and though he couldn't understand them, he tried to repeat them, making her smile faintly. Other times, she would listen as he spoke, tilting her head as though memorizing the sound of English. He began teaching her small words, pointing to himself. Daniel, pointing to her, Alira, pointing to the glass of water. Water. To his surprise, she learned quickly. Her voice carried a gentle music, and even the simplest English words sounded magical when she spoke them. But as the days passed, Daniel noticed something troubling. Lyra's wounds weren't healing like human injuries. The burns glowed faintly, and sometimes her skin shimmered as though fighting against the air itself. She needed more than his simple care. She needed something from her world. Daniel stayed awake at night, scrolling through his computer, studying the strange signal he had first received. Maybe it carried information about her people, her technology, or her needs. He couldn't translate it fully, but he noticed repeating pattern shapes and sounds that might be instructions. He wrote everything down, determined to find a way to help her. One evening, as he sat beside her bed, She reached out with trembling fingers and touched his hand. Her skin was cool, but the gesture was warm, filled with meaning. Her eyes met his, and she whispered softly, "Safe." The word broke something inside him. She felt safe with him. An alien from across the stars, left to die by her own kind, trusted a simple human who had chosen compassion over fear. Daniel squeezed her hand gently, his voice steady even though his heart raced. "Yes, Alira, you're safe here. Promise." And he meant it. Whatever dangers came, whatever the cost, he would keep that promise. The days that followed felt almost unreal. Daniel found himself living in two different worlds at once. On the outside, he was still the same ordinary man buying groceries, paying bills, nodding politely at neighbors. But inside his house, behind locked doors, he was sharing his life with Alira, a being from another galaxy. Every day she grew stronger. The burns on her skin still glowed faintly, but her eyes were clearer, her voice steadier. She could now speak a few English words, simple ones like water, safe, and home. Each time she spoke, Daniel felt something stir inside him. There was a gentleness in her voice that made even ordinary words sound extraordinary. But with her strength returning, Daniel also noticed changes he couldn't explain. Sometimes when she touched objects in the house, they flickered strangely. Lamps pulsed brighter. The television crackled even when it was off, and his old radio picked up ghostly echoes. It was as if her very presence carried an energy his world wasn't meant to handle. Daniel worried, but he didn't show it. Instead, he focused on helping her learn. At night, he read books aloud, pointing to the words, watching her repeat them carefully. She was a fast learner, and though her accent was strange, she began to piece together simple sentences. Still, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling of unease. He had started hearing rumors in town. A farmer claimed he saw strange lights in the desert the same night Daniel had brought Alira home. Others whispered about military trucks seen near the highway, moving late at night without headlights. The news even mentioned an unidentified meteor crash in the region. Daniel's chest tightened each time he heard such reports. He knew it wasn't a meteor, it was her. And if others had seen the lights or tracked the signal, it was only a matter of time before someone came looking. Late one evening, Daniel sat at his desk, staring at the signal still pulsing faintly on his computer screen. He tapped his pencil nervously. Could it be a beacon? Could it be drawing others, her people, or worse, humans who wanted to capture her? He glanced toward the room where Alira slept peacefully, her silver skin shimmering faintly under the blanket. The thought of losing her tightened his chest with fear he couldn't explain. The next morning, that fear grew stronger. Daniel stepped outside to collect the mail. He noticed something unusual, a black SUV parked at the far end of the street. Its windows were tinted, and the engine idled quietly. The moment he looked at it, the vehicle pulled away slowly, as if it didn't want to be noticed. Daniel's heart pounded. He knew it wasn't random. Someone was watching. Back inside, Alira looked at him with concern. Even though her English was limited, she seemed to sense his worry. She placed a hand on his arm, her glowing eyes locking with his. "Danger," she whispered. He froze. She had spoken the word clearly. It wasn't just his fear, it was hers too. Daniel swallowed hard. For the first time, he realized that hiding her might not be enough. The world outside was already stirring, already searching, and the bond growing between them would soon be tested in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The night was still when it happened. Daniel had been half asleep on the couch, his notebook lying open on his lap, filled with scribbles about Alira's strange abilities. The house was dark, except for the faint glow coming from the room where she slept. Then came the sound, 3 sharp knocks at the door. Daniel sat up instantly, his heart slamming against his ribs. Nobody knocked on his door at this hour. He glanced at the clock. It was nearly midnight. For a moment he hoped it was nothing, maybe a lost traveler or a drunk neighbor. But deep down, he knew better. He quietly walked to the door, his bare feet barely making a sound on the wooden floor. He didn't open it. Instead, he peered through the small gap in the curtain. His breath caught. 2 men stood outside, dressed in black suits. They weren't neighbors, and they weren't lost. They looked official too official. A black SUV sat parked on the street, its engine humming softly. "Mr. Daniel Reeves?" One of the men called, his voice calm but firm. "I'd like to ask you a few questions." Daniel's stomach twisted. They knew his name. He stayed silent, his mind racing. If he opened the door, they might search the house. If he refused, they might come back with more. Either way, Alira was in danger. Behind him, he heard the faintest sound, the creak of a floorboard. He turned and saw Alira standing in the hallway, her silver skin shimmering in the dim light. Her glowing blue eyes were wide with fear, her lips trembling, as if she already knew who was outside. Daniel shook his head quickly, motioning for her to stay back. She froze, watching him with silent trust. The men knocked again, harder this time. "Mr. Reeves, we have reason to believe you may have seen something unusual in the desert. A meteor, perhaps. Or something else." Daniel swallowed hard. His voice shook, but he forced himself to answer through the closed door. "I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't see anything." There was silence on the other side. Then one of the men spoke again, his tone colder now. "If you do know something, Mr. Reeves, hiding it would be unwise for your own safety." The words sent a chill down Daniel's spine. These weren't ordinary officials. They weren't here to ask politely. They were here to hunt. After a long pause, the men finally stepped back. The SUV's doors shut and the engine roared as it pulled away. Daniel didn't move until the sound faded into the distance. When he finally turned, Alira was still standing there, her eyes fixed on him. She spoke one word, her voice trembling. "Hunted." Daniel walked over and placed his hands gently on her shoulders. "Not while I'm here," he said firmly. But inside, fear gnawed at him. The first knock had come, and he knew it wouldn't be the last. The world had caught the scent. They were closing in. And if he wanted to protect Alira, he would have to be ready for a fight he never asked for. Daniel didn't sleep that night. He sat at the kitchen table with his head in his hands, staring at the cold cup of coffee he hadn't touched. The knock at the door replayed over and over in his mind, each thud heavier than the last. The men in black suits weren't gone for good. They would return, and next time they wouldn't leave without answers. He looked toward the spare room, where Alira lay asleep. She seemed so peaceful, wrapped in the blanket, her silver skin glowing faintly in the moonlight. To Daniel, she wasn't a threat. She wasn't an experiment. She was someone abandoned, someone who needed saving. But to the people outside, she was a prized thing to capture, dissect, and use. The thought made his jaw tighten. He had promised her safety, and he couldn't break that promise. By morning, Daniel started making a plan. Couldn't just sit and wait for the next knock. He needed to prepare. The first thing he did was move Alira into the basement. It was cramped and dusty, filled with old boxes and tools, but it was hidden. He set up a small mattress there, along with blankets, water, and food. Alira didn't complain. She seemed to understand the danger. Next, he covered the windows with heavy curtains and sealed the doors with extra locks. He'd even bought supplies from stores far away from town so his neighbors wouldn't notice. At the hardware shop, he picked up cameras and motion sensors, setting them up around the property. He wasn't a soldier or a spy, but he would protect her with everything he had. Meanwhile, Alira grew stronger. Her English improved quickly, and soon she was able to speak in short, broken sentences. "You saved me," she told him one evening, placing her hand on his chest. The warmth of her touch spread through him like fire. He smiled, but inside, his fear grew heavier, because strange things were happening too. Daniel noticed that sometimes, when Alira closed her eyes, objects in the room would move ever so slightly, a cup trembling on the table, a lamp flickering without being touched. Once, when she was startled by a loud noise outside, every light in the house burst to life at once, glowing brighter than they ever had before. Her power was real, and if she couldn't control it, it would draw even more attention. Daniel tried to talk to her about it, pointing at the lights and making a questioning face. She shook her head, tears welling in her glowing eyes. "Not control," she whispered. He placed a hand gently on hers. "Then we'll figure it out. Together." But even as he said it, the unease in his chest deepened. He knew that protecting her meant more than just hiding. The world outside was already searching, and sooner or later, they would come. That night, as the wind howled outside the house, Daniel sat awake with a map spread across the table. He traced possible routes out of town, to places far from the government's reach-hold cabins in the woods, abandoned mines in the desert. If they came again, he wouldn't wait for them to break down the door. He and Alira would be ready to disappear. Because this was no longer just about hiding her. It was about survival. The tension around Daniel's home grew heavier with each passing day. At first, it was small things. A car parked too long at the corner, footsteps on the gravel road at night, a shadow moving just outside the window. But soon, it became undeniable. He was being watched. Alira sensed it too. Her glowing blue eyes often flicked toward the windows, as if she could feel the eyes pressing in from the darkness. "They come," she whispered one night, her voice trembling. Daniel nodded grimly. "I know. That's why we can't stay here." He had been planning for days. Drawing maps, marking supply stores, memorizing routes into the mountains. He packed a backpack with food, water, first aid supplies, and a flashlight. He even borrowed camping gear from a coworker, pretending he was going on a solo trip. Every move was careful, quiet, and hidden. But on the night they planned to leave, the danger arrived sooner than expected. Started with the hum of engines. Daniel peered through the curtains and froze. Down the street, 3 black SUVs rolled slowly toward his house. Their headlights were dimmed, but their presence was unmistakable. The hunters had returned, and this time they weren't knocking. "Go," Daniel whispered urgently, turning to Alira. She was already standing, her body trembling, but her eyes fierce. He grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the basement. They slipped out through the old storm doors that led into the backyard. The cold night air bit at Daniel's skin, but adrenaline kept him moving. The SUV stopped in front of the house. Men in black uniforms poured out, carrying flashlights and strange equipment. Daniel's stomach twisted. These weren't simple investigators. They moved like soldiers. Keeping low, Daniel led Alira across the backyard, through the fence, and into the field beyond. The tall grass brushed against them as they crouched low, moving quickly toward the tree line. Behind them, they heard the crash of a door being forced open. The hunters were inside his home now, tearing through his life in search of her. Alira stumbled, her breath ragged. Daniel tightened his grip on her hand. "Almost there," he whispered. "Just a little farther." Suddenly, a spotlight cut through the darkness, sweeping across the field. Daniel's heart stopped. They had seen movement. A voice shouted from behind them, sharp and commanding. "Over there." Bullets of panic shot through him, but before he could react, Alira turned. Glowing eyes flared brighter than ever before. She raised her trembling hands, and in an instant, the spotlight shattered with a burst of unseen energy. Sparks rained down, plunging the field back into darkness. Daniel stared in shock, but there was no time to process what had happened. He pulled her forward, running faster, the sound of shouts and boots pounding behind them. They reached the trees, the cover of branches swallowing them whole. Daniel bent low, guiding her along a narrow path he had memorized. His lungs burned, his legs ached, but he didn't stop. By the time they reached the old Jeep hidden in the woods, Daniel's entire body shook with exhaustion. He helped Alira into the passenger seat, then slid behind the wheel, turning the key with trembling hands. The engine roared to life. As they sped away down the dirt road, headlights flashing behind them, Daniel realized something terrifying and certain. This wasn't just about hiding anymore. The hunt had begun, and now they were running for their lives. The dirt road stretched ahead like an endless ribbon, dust rising behind the Jeep as Daniel pressed the gas pedal harder than he ever had before. The night air whipped through the open windows, stinging his face. Beside him, Alira clutched the seat with trembling hands, her glowing eyes wide with fear and trust all at once. In the rearview mirror, headlights bounced violently as the black SUVs raced after them. Daniel's heart pounded. He had never been in a chase before. He was Santia's soldier or a spy. He was just a man who fixed computers and stared at the stars. And here he was, running from armed hunters with an alien woman at his side. "Hold on," he shouted, swerving hard as the Jeep skidded around a sharp turn. Gravel sprayed into the darkness. SUVs tried to follow, but Daniel knew the back roads better. He'd grown up in this countryside, driving these dirt trails long before they were paved. That was his only advantage. Lyra's voice broke through the roar of the engine. "Why chase us?" she asked, her English broken but clear. Daniel gritted his teeth. "Because they don't see you as a person. They see you as a thing. I'm not going to let them take you." For a moment she stared at him. Then slowly her trembling hand reached for his. Despite the chaos, despite the danger, her touch steadied him. "Trust you," she whispered. The words hit him harder than any bullet could. couldn't let her down. After nearly an hour of weaving through back roads, Daniel finally pulled off into a narrow trail hidden by thick trees. He killed the headlights and cut the engine. Silence swallowed them, broken only by their heavy breathing. The SUVs roared past on the main road, their lights fading into the distance. Daniel slumped against the steering wheel, his chest heaving. "We made it," he whispered. Alira leaned back in her seat, her glowing skin dimmer now, exhaustion clear in her face. But even in her weariness, she smiled faintly at him. It was small, fragile, but it gave him more strength than any weapon could. They camped in the woods that night. Daniel set up a small tent and lit a fire with shaking hands. As the flames crackled, Alira sat close, watching the sparks rise into the sky. She tilted her head toward the stars, whispering words in her language soft, musical, almost like a prayer. Daniel sat beside her, staring too. "Do you miss it, your home?" he asked quietly. She nodded, her eyes glistening. "Alone," she whispered. "Left. To die." Her voice cracked with pain, and for the first time, Daniel saw her not just as a mystery or a miracle, but as someone broken, carrying scars deeper than her wounds. Without thinking, he placed his arm around her shoulders. She stiffened at first, then slowly leaned against him. The firelight flickered across her silver skin, making her look like a living star. In that moment, Daniel made another silent promise, not only to protect her, but to make her feel less alone. For the first time since the signal reached him, he realized this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about love. Fragile, impossible, but real. Morning came quietly, but Daniel's heart knew peace wouldn't last. The woods around them were calm, filled with the songs of birds and the rustling of wind through the trees. Yet danger hung heavy in the air. The hunters would not give up. If the SUVs had already tracked them this far, they could do it again. Daniel understood one truth clearly now. He and Alira couldn't go back. Not to his home, not to the town, not to the life he once knew. Their only chance was to disappear into the wilderness, where the eyes of the world couldn't easily follow. He packed quickly, stuffing food and supplies into the backpack, breaking down the tent, and smothering the fire until no smoke remained. Alira helped where she could, her movements slow but steady. She was still weak, yet there was determination in her glowing eyes. She wanted to survive just as much as he wanted to protect her. As they started walking deeper into the forest, Daniel realized how fragile their plan was. He had no grand strategy, no advanced technology, no safe house waiting. All he had was his knowledge of the land, his stubborn will, and Alira by his side. Still, he pressed forward, guiding her along deer trails and hidden paths. The forest was thick and alive. Shafts of sunlight cut through the canopy, painting golden streaks on the ground. Every sound seemed louder, now the crunch of their steps, the call of distant crows, the snap of a twig underfoot. Daniel's nerves sharpened. Each sound made him wonder if the hunters were near. By midday, they reached a stream. Alira knelt beside it, her silver fingers brushing across the water. The ripples sparkled strangely where her skin touched, as if her presence stirred energy, even in the river. She cupped her hands, drinking slowly, then looked up at him. "Thank you," she said softly. Daniel smiled faintly. "You don't have to thank me. We're in this together." They rested there for a while, but Daniel couldn't shake his unease. He noticed faint tire tracks in the dirt near the edge of the woods, not from his jeep, but from heavy vehicles. His stomach dropped. The hunters had entered the forest. "Time to move," he whispered. The journey grew harder as the day stretched on. The terrain became rocky, the slopes steeper. Alira stumbled more than once, and Daniel caught her each time, refusing to let her fall. At one point, she pressed a trembling hand against his chest, her eyes shimmering with emotion. "I carry burden," she said, her English halting but meaningful. Daniel shook his head. "It's not a burden, it's a choice." Night began to fall again, shadows lengthening across the trees. They found a small cave tucked into the hillside and decided to stay there. Daniel lit another small fire, careful to keep the smoke hidden. As the flames warmed the cave, Alira sat close beside him. She whispered a few more words in her language, words he couldn't understand, but the tone was soft, almost tender. Daniel didn't need to know the translation. He felt it in the way she looked at him with trust, with gratitude. with something unspoken growing stronger each day. But outside, in the dark forest, headlights glowed faintly in the distance. The hunters were closing in again. The night was quiet inside the cave, but Daniel's nerves refused to rest. He sat near the fire with his ears straining against every sound outside. The crackle of twigs, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of leaves, all of it felt like footsteps closing in. Alira sat across from him, her glowing eyes fixed on the flames. She looked calm, but Daniel knew better. She could feel it too. Near midnight, his fears were confirmed. A beam of light sliced through the trees, moving slowly, searching. Voices carried faintly on the wind, men speaking into radios, giving directions. The hunters had found their trail. Daniel's heart hammered. He doused the fire quickly, plunging the cave into near darkness. "We have to go," he whispered. Alira nodded, rising to her feet. She was still weak, but determination burned in her glowing eyes. Daniel grabbed the backpack, slung it over his shoulders, and led her out the back of the cave, where a narrow path climbed steeply into the hills. The forest turned into a maze. Branches clawed at their clothes, roots threatened to trip them, and the ground grew slick with fallen leaves. Behind them, flashlights flickered between the trees, closer and closer. The voices were louder now, sharp and commanding. "Move faster," Daniel urged, his hand gripping Alira's. But Alira stumbled, gasping for breath.
Oh.
Her body wasn't built for this world. Daniel scooped her into his arms without hesitation, pushing himself harder as he carried her uphill. His lungs burned, his muscles screamed, but he didn't slow down. Suddenly, a shout cut through the forest. "There. Don't let them escape." Spotlight snapped on, blinding them as it cut across the trees. Daniel ducked instinctively, pressing Alira close to shield her. The crack of branches behind him told him the hunters were closing in fast. Then something strange happened. Alira lifted her trembling hand toward the light. Her eyes flared brighter than ever, and the spotlight exploded in a shower of sparks. Darkness swallowed the forest again. The men cursed, stumbling blindly. Daniel stared at her in shock, but Alira just shook her head, whispering no choice. He nodded, tightening his grip on her. "Then let's make it count." They pushed deeper into the forest, weaving through narrow trails. The hunters fired flares into the sky, bathing the woods in red light. The glow stretched across the hills, painting shadows that seemed to chase them at every turn. By the time they reached a river, Daniel's strength was nearly gone. He set Alira down gently, gulping air. The river rushed wildly, its surface gleaming under the flare's glow. There was no bridge, no easy way across. The hunters' voices grew louder behind them. They had minutes, maybe seconds. Daniel turned to Alira. "Can you swim?" She shook her head weakly. "No." Daniel looked at the raging water, then back at her. His heart pounded with the weight of the decision. They couldn't stay. They couldn't fight. There was only one option. He gripped her hand tightly. "Then hold on to me. Don't let go." Without another word, he pulled her into the icy current. The river swallowed them whole as the hunters burst onto the riverbank, too late to stop them. The water hit Daniel like a wall of ice. It stole his breath the moment they plunged beneath the surface, dragging him down with crushing force. He held tight to Alira, feeling her arms wrapped desperately around his shoulders. The river roared in his ears, the current pulling them faster and faster through the darkness. He kicked furiously, pushing upward until they broke the surface, both gasping for air. The freezing water burned his lungs, but he kept going, fighting against the pull of the river. Alira clung to him, her glowing eyes wide with fear, her silver hair streaming like ribbons in the current. "Hold on," Daniel shouted, though his words were nearly drowned by the rush of water. The river slammed them against rocks, scraping his arms and legs. Each impact sent pain shooting through his body, but he refused to let go. It was her anchor, her only chance of survival. He pulled her close, keeping her head above water, even as the current threatened to tear them apart. The hunters' shouts faded behind them. Daniel knew they wouldn't risk the river in the dark. For now, the water was both enemy and allyite, hurt them, but it also carried them away to safety. Minutes stretched into eternity. Daniel's muscles screamed, his chest ached, and the cold gnawed at his bones. Alira's grip weakened, her body trembling against his. He couldn't let her slip under. Summoning every ounce of strength left, Daniel kicked harder, angling toward the far bank where trees leaned over the rushing water. At last his hand caught a branch jutting out from the shore. He clung to it with all his strength, pulling Alira with him. Inch by inch he dragged them out of the current until they collapsed onto the muddy bank, gasping, coughing, and shivering from the cold. For a long time they lay there, too exhausted to move. The stars above seemed distant and blurred, their light cold against the black sky. The river thundered beside them, carrying away the last trace of their hunters. Finally, Daniel sat up, his chest still heaving. He looked at Alira, who lay curled on the ground, her silver skin dim, her glowing eyes barely open. He brushed wet strands of her hair from her face. "You're okay," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was saying it to her or to himself. Alira's lips parted. "Cold," she whispered faintly. Daniel pulled off his soaked jacket and wrapped it around her, ignoring his own shivers. He held her close, his body heat the only warmth he could give. "We'll find shelter," he promised. "Just hold on a little longer." Gathering his strength, he helped her to her feet. Together, they stumbled away from the river, deeper into the forest. The ground was uneven, the trees looming tall, but Daniel pressed on, guiding her step by step. At last, they found a hollow beneath an overhanging rock, sheltered from the wind. Daniel settled her there, then worked quickly to build a small fire with trembling hands. Sparks caught, flames flickered, and warmth slowly pushed back the cold. Alira leaned against him, her glowing eyes watching the fire. "Safe?" she asked softly. Daniel nodded, tightening his arm around her shoulders. "For now," he said. But inside he knew the truth. The river had bought them time. Nothing more. The hunters wouldn't stop until they found her. And as Daniel stared into the flames, he realized that their journey was far from over. The fire crackled softly, casting long shadows across the hollow where Daniel and Alira rested. The warmth felt like a blessing after the icy torment of the river. Daniel's clothes still clung damply to his skin, but the heat slowly returned to his bones. Beside him, Alira huddled under his jacket, her silver skin glowing faintly in the orange light. For the first time since the chase began, there was silence, no engines, no shouting voices. No beams of light sweeping the trees, only the sound of the forest at night. Crickets, the rush of the river in the distance, and the steady crackle of the flames. Daniel studied her as she stared into the fire. She looked tired, broken, yet there was something unshakable in her eyes. He knew there were pieces of her story he didn't yet understand. Why had she been left to die? Why were her own people nowhere to be found? And what power burned within her that could shatter lights and bend machines? He finally asked the question that had haunted him since the night he found her. "Alira, why you? Why were you left behind?" She didn't answer at first. Her glowing eyes shimmered as if she were seeing something far away. Then, in her halting English, she whispered, "Punished." Daniel's chest tightened. Punished? For what she struggled with the words, her voice trembling. "My people, strong, proud, but I not obey. I choose mercy." She looked at him, her eyes filling with pain. "They see weakness. They leave me alone." Daniel's heart sank. He could picture a tan alien world, a society that valued strength above all else. Lyra different, softer, perhaps choosing kindness where her people demanded cruelty. For that, they had cast her aside, abandoning her on a planet that was never meant to sustain her. "That's not weakness," Daniel said firmly. "That's strength. Real strength." Her lips trembled into the faintest of smiles, as if his words carried a comfort she hadn't felt in a long time. But Daniel pressed on carefully. "Your powers, the things you can do, are they because of what you are, or something else?" Lyra hesitated. Her hand trembled as she held it out over the fire. The flames flickered strangely, bending toward her palm as if drawn to her. "Energy," she whispered. "All things. Connected, I feel. I move." Daniel watched in awe. She wasn't just another life form. She was something more. Someone tied to the very energy of the universe. No wonder the hunters wanted her. She wasn't just an alien. She was a key to something humanity had never touched. But to Daniel, none of that mattered. What mattered was the way she looked at him, not as a tool or a weapon, but as someone who had chosen to stay by her side. "You're not alone anymore," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the storm in his chest. Not while I'm here." Her glowing eyes softened. She leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder, her body trembling less with fear and more with exhaustion. The fire burned low, wrapping them both in its fragile warmth. And for the first time since this all began, Daniel felt not just fear of what was chasing them, but hope for what they might build together. The next morning, the forest woke in a haze of mist. Daniel stirred from uneasy sleep, his back aching from the cold ground. Alira still rested against him, her silver skin shimmering faintly as dawn filtered through the trees. For a moment, Daniel almost forgot the danger. They looked like two travelers sharing a quiet morning in the wilderness. But the peace didn't last. A sharp buzzing sound echoed in the distance, low at first, then rising steadily. Daniel's eyes shot open. That wasn't the cry of birds or the hum of insects. It was mechanical. He scrambled to his feet and scanned the treetops. Through the mist, a faint silhouette glided across the sky and manned, small with blinking red lights. A drone. His stomach dropped. The hunters had adapted. If they couldn't track him on the ground, they would search from above. "Alira," he whispered urgently, shaking her awake. Her glowing eyes blinked open, confusion flashing before she heard the buzzing. At once, she stiffened. "Danger," she murmured. Daniel grabbed the backpack. "We have to move now." They hurried through the underbrush, their footsteps muffled by damp leaves. The drone buzzed louder, scanning the forest with sharp beams of light. Daniel pulled Alira beneath the cover of thick branches, holding her close as the red light swept dangerously close. He could feel her trembling against him, her breath uneven. When the drone finally passed overhead, they moved again, deeper into the woods. But soon, they realized the drone wasn't alone. Another buzz joined it, then another. By the time they reached a clearing, 3 machines hovered above, crisscrossing the forest in a web of surveillance. Daniel's heart raced. They couldn't outrun drones. They were faster, smarter, and tireless. He turned to Alira, panic rising. "Can you stop them, like you did with the lights?" She looked at him, fear clouding her glowing eyes. "Not control." "Too many," Daniel cursed under his breath. He had to think fast. If they stayed in the open, they would be spotted. If they ran, the drones would follow. His gaze darted to the riverbank nearby, where fallen logs lay across the mud. An idea sparked. "On," he said, pulling her with him. They ducked under the cover of the logs, pressing themselves low into the wet earth. The buzzing grew louder as one of the drones hovered above, its red light slicing the clearing. Daniel held his breath, willing his body to stay still. Beside him, Alira's hand trembled in his. Her glowing skin dimmed as she tried to suppress the energy pulsing within her. For a terrifying moment, Daniel thought the drone would spot them anyway, their hiding place too fragile, too exposed. But then, with a sudden flicker, Alira's eyes flared. The drone above sputtered, its red light blinking wildly. Sparks shot out of its sides, and with a sharp crack, it dropped from the sky, crashing into the mud. The others buzzed angrily, shifting their beams across the forest. Daniel didn't wait. He grabbed Alira's hand and pulled her into the shadows of the trees once more. They ran until their lungs burned, until the forest gave way to rocky slopes leading out of the valley. When they finally stopped to catch their breath, Daniel looked back and saw faint glimmers of red still hovering far behind. "They won't stop," he said grimly. Alira leaned against him, her voice low but firm. "Then, do not stop too." Daniel nodded. She was right. The forest, once their shield, was now a trap. They had to keep moving into new ground, new dangers, and maybe, just maybe, a chance at freedom. Daniel and Alira stumbled out of the thick forest, just as the sun began to set behind the hills. The trees gave way to open fields dotted with barns and scattered fences. It felt strange to see signs of human life again after so many days of hiding. But open ground meant exposure, and exposure meant danger. Daniel scanned the horizon carefully. "We can't stay out here long," he whispered. "Too easy for them to see us." Alira nodded faintly, her glowing eyes scanning the fields. She looked tired, her steps uneven, but her spirit was still unbroken. They followed a narrow dirt path until the silhouette of an old farmhouse appeared in the distance. Its roof sagged, and the paint was peeling, but smoke drifted gently from the chimney. Daniel hesitated. Approaching strangers was risky. If the hunters had spread their search, anyone could be working for them. But the fading light and Alira's exhaustion left him little choice. He knocked softly on the farmhouse door, his heart pounding. For a moment, silence. Oh. Then the door creaked open, revealing a weathered man in his 60s. His eyes narrowed at Daniel, then flicked curiously to Alira. "You're not from around here," the man said gruffly. Daniel forced a shaky smile. "We're just travelers. We need a place to rest for the night." The old man studied them carefully. His eyes lingered on Alira's shimmering skin, and Daniel's chest tightened, ready for panic or anger. But instead, the man simply stepped aside. "Come in, quickly, before anyone sees." Inside the farmhouse smelled of wood smoke and old books. The man led them to the kitchen, where a kettle steamed gently on the stove. "Name's Elias," he said. "Before you ask Gez, I know she's not from here." Daniel's eyes widened. "You know," Elias chuckled dryly, "boy, I've been watching the skies my whole life. Seen lights, heard signals, things the government pretends don't exist. You think I don't recognize the truth when it walks through my door?" Alira tilted her head, studying him with cautious curiosity. Daniel leaned forward. "You're not going to call anyone?" Elias snorted. "Call who? The same men in black who tear apart lives in the name of security? No, I've seen them before, poking around these parts. If they're after her, then I know who the real enemy is." Relief washed over Daniel. For the first time, they weren't completely alone. Elias provided them with warm blankets and hot soup, which Alira sipped slowly, her glowing eyes softening with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. The old man smiled faintly. "Don't thank me yet. If you stay, you'll bring trouble to my door. But I reckon I can help you for a while. There's a storm cellar out back hidden, soundproof, safer than sleeping in the open." Daniel nodded eagerly. "That could save us." But even as hope flickered, Ilias's expression darkened. "You need to move soon. I've heard chatter on my radio. They're not just hunting anymore. They've set up checkpoints, roadblocks. Whole towns watching for you." Daniel's stomach twisted. The net was tightening. Alira reached for his hand beneath the table, her touch steady despite her exhaustion. "Together," she said softly. Daniel squeezed her hand back, his voice low but firm. Together. For the first time, they had an ally. But with the hunters tightening their grip, Daniel knew the road ahead would only grow more dangerous. The storm cellar was small, damp, and smelled of earth, but to Daniel, it felt like a fortress. He and Alira sat together in the flickering glow of a lantern Elias had given them. Outside, the old farmer moved quietly, making sure no tracks or clues betrayed their presence. For the first time in days, Daniel felt like they could breathe. But safety never lasted long. Late that night, just as Daniel was starting to drift into restless sleep, Elias burst into the cellar, his weathered face pale and tight with urgency. "They're here," he whispered sharply. "At!" Black SUVs, 3 of them, pulled up right at the end of my driveway. Daniel's chest tightened like a vice. Alira stiffened beside him, her glowing eyes flaring in alarm. Elias grabbed a rifle from the wall and pressed it into Daniel's hands. "Don't be a fool, don't fire unless you have no choice. But if they find her, they'll take her. You can't let that happen." Daniel's hand shook as he held the weapon. He wasn't a fighter. He wasn't built for violence. Yet the thought of Alira being dragged away, her trust in him broken, gave him a strength he didn't know he had. Above them, footsteps crunched on gravel. Doors slammed shut. Voices carried across the farmhouse yard, cold and commanding. "Search everything." No mistakes this time. Daniel's heart pounded in rhythm with every step above their heads. Alira pressed close to him, her hand trembling in his. He looked into her glowing eyes and whispered, "Stay quiet. I won't let them take you." The sound of boots echoed across the wooden porch. A hard knock rattled the farmhouse door. Elias's voice boomed, steady and calm. "What's the meaning of this?" "We've received reports of suspicious activity," one of the hunters replied. "We need to search your property. This is private land," Elias shot back. "You got a warrant?" Silence hung for a moment. Then, the unmistakable sound of a door splintering filled the night. They weren't asking anymore. They were coming in. Daniel's grip on the rifle tightened, sweat dripping down his forehead. He could hear furniture being shoved aside, boots thudding against wooden floors. They were searching every room. Alira's breathing grew rapid. Her skin shimmered brighter, the glow pulsing in rhythm with her fear. Daniel gently squeezed her shoulders. Calm, please, they'll sense it. The cellar door creaked above. Shadows shifted. A beam of light cut through the cracks. Daniel's blood ran cold. They had found the entrance. Ilias's voice thundered again, closer this time. You've searched enough. There's nothing here. But the hunters ignored him. The latch on the cellar rattled. Daniel raised the rifle, his entire body trembling. He didn't want to shoot. He didn't want to kill. But if they opened that door... Suddenly, Illyra's eyes flared brighter than ever. A wave of unseen energy surged through the cellar, rattling the lantern and making the air vibrate. The latch froze mid-turn, sparks flickering from the metal handle. Above, the hunters shouted in confusion. Daniel stared at her in awe. She wasn't just resisting, she was fighting back. But the effort drained her instantly. Illyra collapsed against him, her skin dimming, her breath ragged. Daniel caught her, holding her tight as the boots stomped away. The hunters cursing about malfunctioning equipment. For now, the secret cellar had held. But Daniel knew it wouldn't hold forever. The hunters were closer than ever. And next time, they might not leave without finding them. The cellar felt colder after the hunters left. Daniel sat with Illyra in his arms, her breathing shallow, her glow faint, as if the energy she had unleashed had drained her completely. He brushed her damp hair away from her face, whispering softly, "It's okay. You did it. You saved us." But deep down, he knew the truth. This was only a pause, not a victory. The cellar door creaked again. Daniel raised the rifle instantly, but it was only Elias, his face grim. He shut the door behind him, his lantern casting sharp shadows on the dirt walls. "They'll be back," he said, voice low, "and next time they'll bring more men. They know something's here." Daniel nodded, his jaw tight. "Then we can't stay," Elias rubbed his tired eyes. "I figured you'd say that. Lucky for you, I've got a plan. Years ago, I dug an old escape tunnel from this cellar out to the woods. Never thought I'd use it, but..." Glanced at Illyra, then back to Daniel. "Seems the time's come." The tunnel was narrow and musty, lined with rotting wooden beams. Daniel carried the backpack, while Elias helped steady Illyra, who leaned weakly against them both. They moved quickly, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the packed earth. Behind them, the farmhouse creaked in the night, unaware it might soon become a battlefield. They emerged in the forest, nearly 100 yards from the house. The air was cool and damp, the trees rising like silent guardians. Elias pointed north. "There's an old rail line not far from here. It's abandoned, but it'll take you deeper into the mountains. It's harder for those bastards to track you there." Daniel gripped his hand firmly. "Thank you for everything." Elias gave a small nod. "Don't thank me yet. Just keep her safe." Before Daniel could respond, the night split open with the roar of engines. Headlights swept across the fields, and the black SUVs returned more this time. At least 5, forming a perimeter around the farmhouse. Armed men spilled out, their flashlights cutting through the mist. "They're back," Elias hissed. "Go!" Daniel and Illyra hurried into the woods, every step fueled by desperation. Behind them, Elias stood tall, rifle in hand, guarding the path. Shots rang out as the hunters spotted movement, and the farmhouse became a storm of shouting and gunfire. Daniel wanted to look back, wanted to help, but Illyra's trembling hand squeezed his. "No, we run," she whispered. His throat tightened. It was right. If they stopped, if they turned back, all of Elias's sacrifice would be wasted. With tears stinging his eyes, Daniel pulled her deeper into the forest. They ran until their legs threatened to give out, until the gunfire faded into the distance. Finally, they collapsed near the edge of the abandoned rail line Elias had spoken of. Rusted tracks stretched into the misty darkness, a forgotten path leading into unknown lands. Daniel sat beside Illyra, both of them gasping for breath. He clenched his fists, fury burning in his chest. "They won't stop," he muttered. "Not ever." Illyra leaned against him, her voice soft but steady. "And we not stop too." Daniel looked at her, the glow of her eyes reflecting his own determination. Elias had given them a chance. Now, it was up to them to keep running, to keep fighting, to survive. The abandoned rail line stretched before them like a scar across the land, overgrown with weeds and framed by rusted metal. The tracks groaned faintly under Daniel's boots as he guided Alira along the path. The mist clung to the rails, twisting into shapes that looked almost alive in the moonlight. For hours they walked in silence, their footsteps echoing against the steel. Daniel kept glancing back, half expecting headlights to cut through the fog, but the woods behind them remained dark. For now, the hunters hadn't found this path. Alira leaned heavily on him, her silver skin dulled from exhaustion, and her glowing eyes kept sweeping the shadows as if she sensed something he couldn't. Finally, she whispered, "Not alone." Daniel froze. "What do you mean?" Before she could answer, he spotted an old rail car derailed off the tracks. Its paint peeled, its windows shattered. It looked like it had been abandoned for decades. But as they drew closer, Daniel noticed signs of recent life. Footprints in the dirt, a fire pit filled with ash, scraps of cloth fluttering from broken metal. "Someone's been here," Daniel muttered. He pushed open the railcar door cautiously, the hinges screeching in protest. Inside, the air smelled of rust and smoke. Makeshift bedding lay scattered across the floor, along with empty cans and bottles. Daniel's chest tightened. Whoever had lived here hadn't just been camping, they had been hiding. Alira ran her fingers across the wall, her touch leaving faint glimmers of light. She closed her eyes, as if listening to echoes in the air. When she opened them again, her voice was low. "Others hunted." Daniel's stomach turned. "You mean we're not the first?" She nodded slowly. The thought chilled him. If the hunters had chased others before, whether human or something else, then this fight was bigger than he had imagined. How many lives had been taken? How many secrets buried under the silence of abandoned places like this? They stayed inside the railcar for a while, resting in the shadows. Daniel lit a small flame in a tin can to keep the chill away, careful not to let the smoke escape through the broken roof. As they sat together, Alira whispered more pieces of her story in her halting English. "My people, many worlds, they take, they rule. But some resist, some hide." Her eyes met his. "Hunters not only yours. Hunters ain't mine too." Daniel realized then that the men in black weren't just chasing her for what she was. They were part of something larger, maybe even connected to her own people's cruelty. The hunters weren't working alone. A shiver ran down his spine. "So this is bigger than us." "Yes," Alira said softly. "But fight. Together." Before Daniel could reply, a sudden creak echoed from outside. The unmistakable crunch of boots on gravel. He extinguished the flame instantly, plunging them into darkness. Voices drifted through the mist low, steady and hunting. The sound of radios crackled, commands being given. They had found the rail line. Daniel's hand found Alira's in the dark. Her fingers trembled, but her grip was strong. They weren't alone anymore, but neither were the hunters. The mist along the rail line grew thicker, curling like smoke around the rusted tracks. Daniel crouched inside the derailed car, his hand gripping Alira's tightly. Outside, the hunters moved with practiced precision, their boots crunching against gravel, their radios hissing with clipped commands. The glow of their flashlights pierced the fog, slicing beams across the darkness. "They're here," Daniel whispered, his voice steady but tight with fear. "We can't run forever." Alira's glowing eyes met his. She was weak, drained from days of fleeing and using her strange power, yet there was fire inside her gaze. "We fight," she said softly. Daniel's heart pounded. He had never been a fighter. He was just a man who once looked at the stars and dreamed. But now, with her at his side, he felt something different, an unshakable will. The hunters closed in, surrounding the rail car. A voice called out sharply, amplified through a speaker. "Daniel Reeves. Step outside with the asset. Cooperate and you live. Resist and you die." Daniel's jaw clenched. "She's not an asset. She's a person." Alira squeezed his hand, whispering in her own language words Daniel didn't understand, but he felt their meaning deep in his chest. "Trust me then." The railcar shuddered. Alira stepped forward, her body trembling, her eyes blazing brighter than ever before. She raised her hands, and the very air around them vibrated. Metal groaned, Sparks crackled and the hunters' flashlights flickered wildly. The first soldier burst through the broken doorway. Daniel swung a piece of iron pipe with every ounce of strength he had, knocking the man back. Another stormed in, but Alira's eyes flared and his weapon sparked, burning hot in his hands until he dropped it with a scream. Chaos erupted outside. Radios blared. Orders shouted, "Contain her now." But the fog itself seemed to answer to Alira's will. Energy rippled through the air, bending beams of light, distorting the hunters' senses. Some stumbled, firing blindly into the mist. Daniel moved with her, protecting her flank, striking when they closed in too near. For the first time, they weren't running, they were standing their ground. Yet the effort drained her fast. Her glow dimmed, her breath shallow. Daniel caught her as she nearly collapsed, holding her close. "No, stay with me," he begged. She touched his face with trembling fingers. "If I fall, you live. Promise me." Daniel shook his head fiercely. "No, we live. Both of us." Together, summoning his courage, Daniel dragged her toward the far side of the railcar. Bullets struck metal around them, sparks flying, but he pushed forward. At the edge of the tracks, Alira turned once more, her eyes blazing with a final surge of power. The ground shook. The rusted rails lit up like veins of fire, sending a shockwave rippling through the fog. Hunters were thrown back, their equipment sparking, radios shattering into silence. For one brief moment, the night belonged to her. When the glow faded, Alira collapsed into Daniel's arms, utterly spent. The forest fell silent, except for their ragged breaths. The hunters lay scattered, stunned but alive, their pursuit broken for now. Daniel looked down at her fragile form, cradling her against his chest. "We did it," he whispered, tears burning in his eyes. "We're still here." Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "Together," she whispered back. And as the mist curled around them, Daniel knew this wasn't the end of their journey. The hunters would rise again. More dangers would come. But so would more hope, more courage, and a love that had already defied the stars.